Hi, I'm Michael Palandro with Lectio for Life. And in today's episode, what I'd like to do is to give a little fuller definition, understanding of Lectio Divina, which I've been defining as a prayerful and meditative reading of Scripture that's employed to facilitate a transformative intimacy with God. Now, just in openness, I want you to know that that definition is essentially adapted from the definition given in this book, which is called Discovering Lectio Divina by Will Hoyt and Howard. Now, you can find this resources and any other that I might refer to in this episode or others on my website, lectioforlife.com. If you'll click on resources, you can find lots of things, and in case you're interested in reading some of these things on your own. So when we think about Lectio Divina, it's pretty basic, really pretty elementary. In the form that's been handed down to us, there are essentially 4 pieces to it that tell us kind of what to do and the process to follow. Created, I should say, developed and then finally codified in the 12th century of the Christian era in a book called Ladder of Monks, which at the time was a letter, written by someone whose name is, now listen carefully, Guido II. Not Guido, like Guido Sarducci from Saturday Night Live, but Guido. And now the elements as he defined them, he uses Latin terms, but the book, which you can read for yourself, called Ladder of Monks by Guido II, I would highly recommend it if you're wanting to understand better what Lectio Divina is and how it works. He does an amazing job, and his language is quite inspiring as well. So he's using Latin, and then we have English terms that are associated with those, and this book I showed you is actually in English. And those 4 elements are Lectio, Meditatio, Oratio, and Contemplatio, which are transliterated most directly as reading, meditating, prayer, and contemplation. One of the reasons we want to talk about this further is in current English usage, for many of us, meditation and contemplation are essentially the same thing to us. But that was not the case when these things were being written and the meaning of the words as they're used in Lectio Divina. And I want us to appreciate that difference so that we can get the most from this. Now, you may know that I prefer a 6-step model or a 6-phase model. And that really comes from the research that I've done in the development of Lectio Divina through centuries, where it actually really starts with prayer then reading, and it's tended to end with living into what we've learned, putting it into action. But the essential model that we use when we're reading Scripture prayerfully has 4 basic parts to it. So to give us a fuller appreciation of what it is and how it works and what happens as we're engaged in Lectio Divina, I want to look at a couple other dimensions of it. I don't know of a better word to call it. We'll call it dimensions. I actually have a little chart I've created, which I'm sorry, it's called Lectio Divina Dynamic Matrix. You can find that on my website as well under resources. So the fact is, though, even with Guido in the Ladder of Monks, he distinguishes between 2 specific dimensions. One are what I'm referring to as the elements. He says they're properties, or because he uses a ladder as the sort of the concept of moving from reading to contemplation, he calls them the rungs on the ladder, or because he sees it as getting closer to God in the process, degrees. But then on the other hand, he used the term functions. I like the word dynamics to describe, well, what is happening when we're engaging in each of these elements or in each of these phases. So, for example, in the Ladder of Monks, he likes to describe it that when we're reading, we are in fact seeking. we're seeking to see what's being said. We're seeking to see what it's talking about. We're seeking to hear God's voice as we're reading the Bible. And then in the second phase of meditatio, he says that we're perceiving, meaning we're perceiving the meaning. Oh, so this is what it's saying, and this is what it's about, and this is what is implied for my life with God. And then in the next phase, which is about prayer, it says now we're asking. We're asking God to give us what we've come to realize is available to us from God, that the text has described to us and is now offered to us. But we know we can't just get it because we want it, no matter how hard we try. So we need to ask God for it. We're essentially asking for a greater revelation of God in our lives and for an impartation of truth where it kind of takes root in us and transforms us. And so then the last phase, contemplation, says here is where we taste it. We actually get a glimpse of God in this fresh way. We actually begin to experience the meaning of the text, whatever is being offered to us, the truth that can affect us. We are tasting it, getting an initial experience and encounter with it. So as I've practiced this and looked at these functions, I thought about the dynamics just slightly different. And I would say that as we're reading, this is the point at which we are perceiving what's there. Because when we come to the text, to the Bible, to the scriptures, I mean, not until we begin looking at it or listening to it, seeing the words or hearing the words, do we even know what is here. And the more we read or perceive what's being said and what it's about, we begin to understand what it means and what the significance of the text is for our lives. And now, understanding what it means, generally, I want that. I want that for my life. And so I'm going to respond, hopefully, ideally, asking God, as Guigo would say, for this to become part of my life, part of my reality, to take root in me. But hey, here's what I've come to understand. I don't always respond to God's invitation with a big yes and give it to me. Sometimes I don't even know if I believe it's true. Sometimes I don't want it. I find myself more refusing or resisting God at this point, and that might be my initial response. Ideally, it would be one of desiring and asking for it. But it might take me a while to get there. Maybe later in this reading session, maybe later in the week, maybe later in my life. And so I like the term respond as a general way to think about what we do when we understand the meaning and implications of the text. In another episode, I'll talk about how we can apply Lectio Divina to other things beyond the Bible, other things that we read, but also encounters with people and experiences in the day, in our life, and even internally, our experiences. And so I like using respond as that third element, because our response might not be prayer beyond the scripture. And then the fourth phase, contemplation, I like to use the word receive. Lots of people are using the term rest, but I find that is too passive. This is not the time to kind of like wind down. This is actually the apex, the denouement of Lectio Divina, where we actually begin to experience what's being offered that we have now asked for in our response. And lots can take place, not only at an intellectual level, but also at an emotional level. And in fact, for the ancient writers and practitioners, they often noticed that they would cry both during the prayerful phase as well as during the receiving phase, as they were being deeply impacted by the presence of God and the love of God and the truth that was being revealed to them in the scripture. Now, I've taken it kind of another step. What I'm referring to is characteristics. Again, remember, I'm putting out these things as a guide to help us to know, is what I'm doing Lectio Divina? Do I have full enough expectations of what's being offered through the scripture with Lectio Divina? And am I getting the full benefit of it? There's a book called Sacred Reading by Michael Casey. And that one of the things that I really noticed that he said in here, hey, guides like this aren't like rules, but what they do is they inform us about what Lectio Divina is so that we can have a good sense of, is it what I'm doing? And am I getting all that can be gotten? So I've identified what I would say are 6 characteristics that should be true of my Lectio Divina and yours. 1, is it textual? Do the words matter? Is what's being said matter? 2nd, is it personal? Is it not just something for people 1,000 years ago or longer? Did it not just have meaning historically, but is it speaking to me about my life, about my spirituality, about who I am in my life with God? Is it relational? Is it not only about words and their meaning, but is it drawing me closer to God, into greater intimacy with Him? Am I encountering Him in the process of Lectio Divina? The next is conversational. Are we both talking? Am I hearing God as I'm prayerfully reading and then responding so that God gets to hear me? Is there a back and forth dynamic that is conversational in nature? Next, is it experiential? Is something actually transpiring in me and in you when I'm reading the scripture with Lectio Divina? Am I encountering God in some way that's recognizable by me at an intellectual level, at an emotional level, at a heart level? And sometimes I know that by my emotional response. For the early creators and practitioners of Lectio Divina, they often experienced tears, crying, and they would see that as kind of the sign of the presence of God and grace working in them through the text. And the last thing, is it transformational? Is it making a difference in my life? Is it changing the nature and quality of my relationship with God? Is it changing who I am as a person, my character, the way I look at things and look at people, how I think, what I value, what I imagine for my life? And ultimately, is it changing the actual way that I live, what I say, how I say it, what I do, and how I do it? All of this is what's being offered to us in Lectio Divina. And I hope you found this further description to be helpful in your own practice of Lectio Divina. And if you'd like to know more, again, go to my website, lectioforlife.com, where we can continue to explore scripture and spirituality, and especially Lectio Divina. Thank you for listening today. I appreciate it.